This is Stare Down the Bull. I'm your host, Susan Hunt. Around here, we tackle the hard stuff: how to lead with clarity, leveraging AI, and turn strategy into real results. My guest today brings a powerful perspective on how to do exactly that. Let's dive in. Today on Stare Down the Bull, I'm joined by Chris Arnold, one of the most experienced voices in customer experience, AI, and contact center automation. Chris spent 20 years at Verizon, helped shaping CX at a true enterprise scale, building the kind of operational and strategic perspectives that can only come with being in that arena. In 2019, Chris left Verizon and stepped into a new chapter, one that quickly tested him in ways no leadership role ever could. Just months later, he experienced a profound personal loss while preparing to reinvent his career in a rapidly changing CX landscape. In 2020, he joined ASAP as the vice president of CX strategy, navigating the acceleration of AI, the disruption of COVID, and the growing pressure on CX leaders to do more with less. Today, Chris continues to lead at the intersection of empathy, automation, and scale. This conversation is about what it really takes to build customer experience that works for businesses, for customers, and for the people behind the technology. Welcome to Stare Down the Bull, Chris. Thanks for showing up.
Thank you so much for having me, Susan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. It's great to chat with you again. So you spent 20 years at Verizon leading CX at a massive enterprise scale. What did those years teach you about what actually moves the needle in customer experience?
Yeah, so I would say in a word, it would probably be empathy. When you talk about moving the needle in the very broad realm of customer experience, empathy is probably the most underrated, you know, thought. When it comes to customer experience, you really have to put yourselves in the shoes of those customers. And I have the good fortune to have started my career as an agent on the phones, and
Oh,
I worked, in the contact center while I was in college, and I spent several years in retail. So I spent a lot of my career on the front line, from different customer touch points. And so that gives me a pretty good level of empathy, having walked a few miles in those shoes, and understanding the complexities of meeting customer needs. And even in, say, the contact center and retail environment, there's an expectation of continuous improvement. And so there's a tremendous amount of pressure, around performance for these frontline and often underpaid employees who have a
yeah.
very challenging job. And I would say, in the 25 years that it's been since I was on the front lines, all of the automations and the things that we've deployed in terms of technology has only made those jobs even more complicated because the front line is
Okay.
left with the often complex and more emotive um, situations, the real sticky situations, those moments that matter for a brand. And so bringing a authentic level of empathy is critical to the customer experience.
Yeah, you always think about, empathy is a really hard thing to bring into technology. It's one of the biggest challenges for sure. But you often think about automation as being important because it drives costs, it makes things more rapid for the customer. You really don't spend much time, at least I've never spent much time thinking about the fact that this leaves the call center reps with all of the really hard stuff without ever really having a break to do something easy, like it's always the same hard, 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 hard with no break. So that's an interesting perspective that, even with all my years in customers call centers, I've never really thought of it that way. So very good point that I haven't heard before. CX right now is really under enormous pressure from cost reduction, automation, executive demands for efficiency. Where do you see the most companies getting CX wrong today? Because I think that there's a lot of that out there and has been, and I know we've been trying to kind of correct that for many, many, many years. But where's it at now? Where are they getting it wrong now?
Yeah, the what I see, and I work with enterprises of all sizes, in the last 6 years since leaving ASAP, or I'm sorry, leaving Verizon and joining ASAP, I have seen companies of all sizes still sort of suffering from the things that I remember, 20 years ago, which I would say is, a sort of a binary mindset. For a very long time, we've operated with this either or mindset. It's either voice or digital.
Yeah.
it's agents or automation, it's cost or satisfaction, and I still see that. It's very prevalent today. It's almost like we have to pick one or the other. And maybe, we'll talk a little bit more about why we no longer have to pick either or. It's really a both and environment now with today's technology. It can be voice and digital. It's, how do I leverage humans and automation to create the business outcomes I'm looking for? And, you think about customer satisfaction, companies have made tremendous amounts of investments in technologies for the last 2 decades, only to see customer satisfaction remain flat, if not going in the wrong direction. So obviously that's not the return on investment we've been looking for. So I think as we move forward, it's really making sure we don't repeat the sins of the past by adopting that binary mindset, and sort of forcing ourselves into this either or, execution.
Yeah, I'm gonna be interested to hear how you think about merging that together, because 'cause you're right, it's actually been when I was selling to Verizon, it was like, automate this section because we can, and leave that section the other way, like, that merging of the 2 technologies was never something that, not that we didn't desire for that outcome, but we never really emphasized or worked on that. It's sort of cannibalistic to the technology companies. So it's really up to the companies that are actually deploying it to kind of figure out how to do that right. You're not going to hear somebody saying, hey, have humans do this when automation can do this. They're trying to sell their technology. So that's one of the issues. As a vice president of CX strategy at ASAP, you've been at the center of AI driving transformation in the contact center. What do you think the biggest misconceptions leaders have about AI and CX at this point in time?
Yeah, I mean, as you imagine, particularly when you work with enterprises of all different sizes, there's a lot of misconceptions around AI. I have observed enterprises, some of the largest, most complex organizations really have a great start with their AI deployments. But on any given day, you can see in the headlines that, 95% of AI pilots are failing, and so there's a lot of, I would say, confusion, and I would say to answer the question, there's probably two extremes that I see. There's this sort of modern day version of build versus buy,
Hmm.
where I've worked with enterprises that because of the availability, the accessibility of, say, large language models, it's super easy to get to Chat GPT. Obviously, we're all using it.
Yeah.
Um, some of the largest, most complex organizations in the world have said, okay, we're going to build this ourselves because we can access it. We're going to build a tool that will really help transform our business because it sits on top of an LLM. And so what they do is they end up creating a employee facing tool that does retrieve knowledge. It surfaces answers to questions for those employees, but it just doesn't move the needle in terms of business outcomes because
Yeah.
it doesn't have access to all of the systems, all of the information needed to really meet the needs of consumers, which again, what's left, for consumers is complex. Many times it's very emotive. This is the third time I'm calling, and so I think they've underestimated to a degree the ability for them to build an AI solution that will truly move the needle for them in terms of customer experience. On the other side of that, I've also been in front of a lot of prospective customers while at ASAP where, this is just too far ahead for us. We're going to sort of play a wait and see, and I think that ends very badly for those companies because AI is very rapidly becoming part of the organizational fabric. Uh, the way I would characterize it for the enterprises that I see probably furthest along, it's probably just become part of their environment. It's almost like the internet has just sort of faded into the background for every company uses the internet. We're just a couple of years from every company using artificial intelligence, and it fades into the environment. It becomes a tool that's just, ubiquitous throughout the entire organization. So those are the two extremes where it's the modern day version of build versus buy. And you still have companies sitting on the sidelines waiting and seeing. And I think that will prove to be an existential threat for the companies who aren't getting into the AI game, already.
You just said so much in one paragraph. I'm going to back up a little bit. First of all, I'm surprised, but not surprised that these giant companies are still doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting different results. I mean, if they think that they could just throw something on top of their network of 50,000 systems and have it work in a way that matters. I just find that shocking at this point because they all have typically deployed really hard technologies like speech recognition and other technologies that require hooks into multiple systems for it to be valuable. So the fact that they're still doing this kind of blows my mind. They know what the end result is going to be. It's going to be exactly as it's always been. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is I did have a VP of Google on a couple of weeks ago, and he was fascinated. I'm sorry, not Google, GoDaddy. My apologies, Jack. GoDaddy. And he was talking about kind of not the obsolescence of websites and the internet because of AI, but definitely how that is really changing so rapidly and how we're not really going to websites anymore. If we want to know anything about anything, we just chat GPT it or whatever, like, and you get all of the data that you need about pretty much any topic. So I find this a really fascinating part of everything that's going on. And it kind of reminds me of like the early 2000s when the internet was just coming up and you weren't going to be calling companies or you weren't going to be looking for brochures anymore, that type of thing. It's just that in a far more advanced scenario. So that's really interesting. What you just talked about, that was a lot of information you just talked about in one short paragraph. So there's a growing belief that AI will eventually outperform humans in most customer interactions. Like this has been my belief for 25 years. I've been wrong for 25 years, but do you think at this point now where we are with the technology that that's true? And if leaders really believe that now, or if we still have a ways to go? And what are the dangerous decisions that they're making right now that might be too soon based
Yep.
on that thought?
I would say in a lot of ways we're already there. There's a lot of things that AI is already doing, and I'm thinking specifically about the companies that have probably taken the right steps to lay a strong foundation for their AI deployments. And in say in the contact center where there's millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of interactions, minutes of work are being replaced by conversational AI. So what we would consider the generative side that
Yep.
is very capable of having a very consistent human-like conversation that is very quickly replacing humans. And none of this is, to sort of vilify or speak negatively of the work that human agents have done in the past. These are very, very tough jobs, as I already said. And the contact center specifically has a lot of systemic issues where the contact center can't scale up to, peaks in volume.
Yeah.
And so there's a negative customer experience associated with that. Inside the contact center, there's massive issues with absenteeism and attrition because these jobs are so challenging, stressful, going back to the performance expectations I mentioned before. AI agents don't miss work. They don't
You're right.
so the best companies recognize the value of in a very responsible way. How can we use AI to replace as much of what the humans have been doing really since the beginning of time, which is largely the conversation, but giving that AI the right information that may be found in an FAQ and a knowledge base, hooks into systems like you just mentioned so that transactions can be facilitated. And this is where you get beyond the generative AI and you start to get more into the agentic AI, where I think of the generative AI agent as more of your content generator. It's a great speaker.
Yeah.
It's a conversationalist. It can create on the fly. Whereas the agentic side of the equation is the project manager that can actually go out and get real work, real transactions done. If a customer needs a credit, it can be facilitated with the AI. We've never been there in the past with the more deterministic chatbots. And so for the first time, when you marry generative and agentic up, you can actually drive real world outcomes. And companies are doing this at scale today. but it's really critical in terms of how you get there. There's some things that I cannot underscore enough when it comes to critical thinking, decision making, empathy, like we just talked about. There is a role for the humans to really more so supervise the AI agent rather than what we've done in the most recent years, which is have the AI serve the human agent. We're now flipping the script on that, and it's completely transforming the role that many employees have within this CX space. And so it's already happening today. The best companies are figuring out how do we upskill our employees in a way that when we arm them with the right AI solution, how do those roles change? And so it becomes less about eliminating humans and really more about elevating the work that we do.
I do think that it's an imperative for all of these companies that have these massive call centers, and some companies have massive call centers. Um, that, during COVID, they were all really exposed. It really exposed all the flaws in those systems, those networks, not just call centers, but call centers was one that was really hit hard. It was really obvious to the entire world. It was really obvious to the entire population. And technologies did step in really quickly and kind of help solve that problem. But that was a massive exposure that I don't think anybody really ever thought of before COVID. So it's impossible to ignore that. It's happened. If it's happened, it can happen again, right? So AI definitely comes in, and chat bots and all of that. I worked at Live Person at the time. So we were rolling out massive chatbot systems at scale that had never been rolled out like that in a ridiculously short period of time back then, because humans couldn't fill the gap on that anymore. So I do think that there was a big lesson taught there, and most companies are taking that seriously because it is a big exposure. AI exposes different things, but human talent uh, needs to have some sort of backup when it's critical, like the call centers are to all these companies.
And I think you kind of raised such a good point because it's another example of our binary way of thinking where
Yes.
it's work from the office was all we really ever knew until COVID was a forcing function where that was no longer an option. And now you could really see the companies that had been forward thinking enough to have a work from home program
Yes.
weren't caught on their heels the way other companies who really had sort of this one line of thinking is everything happens within a contact center office environment. And so now again, it's not work from home or work from the office, it's both. And how do we use both to optimize outcomes?
Yeah. Yeah, we've changed a lot with regards to that. I think I shared with you when we were chatting a couple of weeks ago that my stepdaughter, I won't say who she works for, but she's literally never been in an office. She works for a major corporation. She was hired 5 years ago, right when COVID hit, and she literally has never worked in an office. And that's like a topic for another day because there's really upside and negatives to that, in my opinion. But being prepared for that as a company, regardless of who you are, if you have a large scale call center or anything that interacts with individuals, you need to be prepared one way or another so that if that happens again, it's not so jarring, it's not such a big deal. And I don't think it will be based on how people work today. They work much differently. And an entire generation is being brought up to work in a way different way than we certainly did for sure. So thank you for that, COVID. I mean, I guess something good came out of that. Looking ahead, what will separate CS organizations from average ones over the next three to 5 years as AI become like table stakes, which you kind of referred to that a little bit back, but I want to understand what you think is going to separate the two, good and bad, going forward.
Yeah. I think the road to average is a very, very wide one,
Yeah.
and I think about kind of going back to that binary mindset and the power of having a more inclusive mindset is going to separate the winners from the losers. Who can actually modernize their operations in a way that it's inclusive of voice and digital. It's humans and automation. It's work from home and work from the office, and how do we execute in a way where we now are seeing rises in customer satisfaction and reductions in cost. I think, what I'm already observing is companies that do this the right way are realizing, things that we've never realized in the past. If you wanted to improve satisfaction in the customer experience, you had to increase your cost. And now I'm seeing us bend cost curves and I'm seeing satisfaction increase, particularly with customers that I've worked with in the airlines and in the telcos, where these
Yeah.
are, you know, when your smartphone isn't experiencing an outage, that's like a life ending situation here where
Yeah.
I can't reach out to the people, my friends and family, or your flight is delayed or canceled, and I need to rebook. These are things that need urgent attention right now. Historical technologies have never been able to deliver on that. AI with the right data, with the right system access, going back to generative and agentic AI, is actually able to do this at scale. So these companies who could not staff to these peaks in volumes for these anomalous events are now able to deploy these technology, the AI agents, in a way that mitigates all of that. And so I think that will only accelerate. There is large enterprises that are learning and iterating already. That sort of flywheel will continue to accelerate. And the ones that are doing it right, I would say there's two or three things that I see consistently fueling their success. The first one is governance. They have recognized a lot of the customer experience issues in the past have been caused by fragmentation, sort of friction that exists, where if a customer calls in, we had no idea that they were just chatting with us. We have no idea that they've been to the retail store two or three times. We had no idea that they were on the website. So there's all these different customer touch points, which because of the organizational silos, it has created a fragmented customer experience. So what I'm seeing the best companies do is they're creating some governance around their AI strategy, and they're bringing in stakeholders from all of these critical business units, the different departments that used to never speak to each other.
Yes.
And so instead of deploying their own siloed AI strategy, they're coming at this with one cohesive, say, AI brain. And so that all of these different departments, all these different customer touch points, whether it's the digital team that's managing the website and the mobile app, maybe the IVR. So you think about the voice environment that has historically never talked to the digital team. They're now at the same table and they're all mapping out customer journeys from end to end so that they understand from a customer's point of view, where is the friction? Where are things breaking down? Where are our customers not getting what they need in the retail store? They call into the contact center and they get a completely different answer. They're having to repeat themselves. Everything that has caused CX to stall for the
Yeah.
last decades, this AI governance and the fact that all of these key stakeholders are at the table is a game changer. And out of that AI governance is sort of a critical benefit, which is the accountability. Who is accountable for deploying this AI and the outcomes that it generates? I think it's absolutely critical that there be a clear line of sight to who's accountable for the AI program, particularly when you think about all the different departments that will be leveraging a singular solution. And to me, it all really begins with sort of an obsession around the customer. The best companies, that I see are truly, instead of it being great slideware, it's actually sort of boots on the ground or saying, okay, we don't do something unless it positively impacts the customer experience. And how does this impact the retail store? How does it impact the contact center? Every one of those customer touch points. And so there is an addressing of the customer fragmentation, one AI brain, departments that instead of having their own conflicting agendas, they're all singing from the same sheet of music. And, the third and final thing would be out of all of this, understanding that we're putting an AI tool set in front, or in the hands of our employees. How are we communicating our AI strategy? How are we evolving the work that these people do? I could go down a pretty lengthy list of roles that don't need to be eliminated, but roles that need to evolve because now they have access to tools that they didn't have before. So the best companies are already well underway of upskilling those employees. And it's not a matter of bringing in an army of software engineers. I think that's another really critical misconception is that for us to have a great success with our AI deployment, we need to have really smart PhDs or software engineers to come in and deploy AI. No, you need to take the people that really understand your business, understand where those fragmentation and friction points are, and how do we leverage a technology to address broken processes, broken policies, because it cannot be just the technology. You have to look at the people, the processes, and the technology. And the companies that are going further the fastest are the ones that are looking widely across the entire organization.
I'm going to say one further thing that's probably a little bit on the controversial side. When I was selling into these big companies or working with my team selling into, and one of the most common things that we ran into was not so much that the heads of individual departments didn't work or want to work together. It is the fact that the imperatives from the CEO did not align with that, which meant that the bonusing structure for the executive heads did not align with that. So that is a really important thing that needs to be aligned top down in order for this to make sense. If you have, a group of people that are comped and judged on their jobs one way that is in direct conflict with creating that environment that allows for great customer service, you continue to have a problem. So it has to start at the CEO. It has to start at their critical imperatives for the year, and customer success should always be an imperative along those lines so that it runs down from the top. And that includes comp, bonusing. The heads in these groups are all in line and in lockstep. And that, sir, is a very hard thing to do,
That's that,
especially if you've been working in silos for the last 50 years. It is freaking hard. There are a couple of, yeah, there are a couple of tech companies that do a really good job of this. Salesforce is one of them. They start with Mark Benioff's imperatives for the year, and it runs down, 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 down to the lowest level employee so that the whole thing is in line. That's why they are, in my experience, the selling machine that they are is because that is aligned. Like there are two or three imperatives that each leader has every single year, and it starts up at the top and it goes all the way down. I don't know if they still do that, but when I was there, they did that. It was one of the most impressive things because it aligned everybody to the same accomplishments. And I never saw them deviate from those deterministic things that they were going to do that year. These are the goals. This is what we're doing. This is how we're going to do it. And this is how each person is going to contribute to that. So when a Citi or a JP Morgan Chase or a Verizon or whoever can do that same exact thing with regards to customer success and AI deployment, they're going to be really, really successful, but it's really, really hard. It's really
for
hard.
sure.
So fingers
And
crossed for these
one thing I'll add
companies.
to that, Susan, is you make such a good point. And I think there's a limited number of these opportunities in our career where something is so critical that virtually every boardroom in the world is having a conversation about what is our AI strategy. That means you have the CEO's attention. It means you have
Yes.
the attention of the entire C-suite. Those don't come around that often. And so for the leaders listening, now is the opportunity to make sure you have exactly what you just described, that top down, we're all rowing in the same direction because it's that sort of alignment. And it's the customer that will benefit because when you get all of these key stakeholders that become part of this AI governance council,
Yeah.
every rowing into the same direction, that's where real transformation will occur. So it's such a good point.
Yep. Yep. Well, let's hope that they, start moving in that direction because I think it'll make a big impact on their customers, which is ultimately, making money is really important, but you need your customers to do that. So, you want to make them happy as well, right?
Yeah.
So let's pivot a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about your personal perspective on resilience, because you went through something that I found to be very dramatic over the last 5 years after leaving Verizon. in 2019, I think it is, right? Your life dramatically changed in a matter of months. How did that experience reshape the way you think about leadership and responsibility at work? And please feel free to share as much of what happened as you want or don't want.
Yeah. I, um, I will share, some context. I won't share every detail. I don't think everybody needs all that, but yes, in 2019, I think it was September, October, I had gotten to a point after almost 20 years of working in telecommunications, started with Alltel that was acquired by Verizon back in 2008, 2009. um, had after 2009 became a Verizon employee, and I think we did 8 or 9 corporate relocations, and so that was a great opportunity for me and my family, to sort of learn to really rely on each other as you're moving into all these different new environments, new communities, you meet new friends. And so we did that for almost 20 years, and my wife and I had been married for, um, 15 years. We had 3 kids, and so, it was probably October of 2019, I set out on this new journey, after 20 years of being with largely the same company, said it was time for me to do something different. And so I started talking to various, technology companies, which is what I was doing at the time with Verizon. I managed all of the contact center technology. I think we had about 50,000 desktops globally at the time, and I was talking to some of those technology companies that I was previously a customer with because I got to see the technology up close and personal. So December of 2019 comes around, and out of nowhere, my wife passes away. She
Yeah.
passed away of a hemorrhagic stroke. So similar to an aneurysm, but different. 43 years old, comes completely out of nowhere. I am sort of upending our life because now I am pursuing, a new career, having no idea what I'm going to do next. Verizon was fantastic. They were great to us, gave us a great, you know, offboarding experience. When they found out about what happened to my wife, they hit the brakes on everything and really supported me every step of the way. And so 2019 quickly becomes 2020. And here I am, now a widower, um, overnight, literally overnight. We were in the hospital for 3 days. The doctors couldn't save her. So I had to tell my children that their mom's not coming back. And at the time, my children were 13, almost 10, and 8. So it's never easy, but those are incredibly challenging times. Those are incredibly challenging ages. And so all of
Yeah.
a sudden, I'm a single father trying to figure out how do I do this on my own, and how do I provide for my family? I took, 6 weeks or so off from the job search just to try to make sure that my family was cared for. Um, and then had to go back to search for the job. And in that search, I found ASAP, and ASAP really rise to the occasion, and so I was able to start a new career, pursuing a career in artificial intelligence software. Oddly enough, uh, I go to New York City to do my round of interviews, and the very next week after getting the job, the world shuts down because of COVID.
Yeah.
And I look back on COVID and, it's hard to say anything like COVID could be a blessing, but when the world shut down,
Yeah.
it all of a sudden made a big part of my life as father of 3 young kids more manageable.
Yeah. It was a gift to you at the time.
It's so weird to even put it into that category, but it it actually gave me a moment to breathe because those 3 kids had sports activities, they had theater, they had dance, they had all the things that we as parents try to give our children. And it's manageable when it's 2 of you, and me and my wife were a team. We always divided and conquered, and that worked. And then all of a sudden overnight, that was gone.
Yeah.
And so I entered into this new career. And yeah, I entered into this new career with a brand new perspective. Now I'm viewing my leadership, and I believe you used the word responsibility in a very different way, because I see, almost the the fragility of life has become so real to me now. And I don't mean life or death. I'm talking about everything in life is so fragile,
Yes.
and so, yes, life or death, you never know when life is going to punch you in the face. I think the longer we live, it's just a matter of time before it comes our way, and so we have to choose our response. But for me, it put everything into a very clear focus. I had no choice but to focus on what mattered most. And so, in terms of leadership, it instantly became about eliminating the clutter, eliminating the noise, and focusing my family on what absolutely mattered, what absolutely must get done. First things had to be first. And that spilled over into my leadership, at ASAP. You know, when I came to ASAP, I saw us running after a lot of things that really were not focused on what we were trying to achieve. And so I came in as a new guy and I said, "Hey, I got a fresh set of eyes here." And so I had a little bit of license to give some critical feedback. And that set me out on a journey working with our product team to say, look, we really need to refine our focus. We're
Uh-huh.
not really focused on product market fit. We're not solutioning our customers the way that we need to be solutioned. And in a lot of ways, that experience, in my family life, my personal life, led to a sort of a radical focus on what really matters most in my professional life.
I think that first of all, what you went through, I was trying to get you to come to live person at the time, I think. So you and I were actually talking through this period of time. And, I love having people on the show that have had these kind of experiences that are so dramatic. Because truthfully, somewhere in your life, you're going to have these experiences. Some people have more of them than others. But I think it's important to point out that we need to give people grace because a lot of times people are going through these kind of really traumatic life experiences and they're still showing up every day to do the job. I mean, I don't even know how you did it. I've done it in my life too, and I don't know how I did it either, by the way. But I think it's an important point to kind of make that you never really know what somebody is going through and to give people a little bit more grace in life, do you have any advice for people that are going through these type of personal crises? And I think in during COVID, everybody was kind of going through their own type of personal crisis. This was extreme, but I think everybody kind of went through their own personal crisis. Can you give any advice on how to lead through this kind of pain that you went through? Because you didn't just lead, you led your children, you changed your career, you you focused on everything that matters. You did it. You made it through somehow. So any advice you could give to people I think would be valuable.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I've seen, and I think I've said this to multiple people in the last 6 years since, this whole new chapter started, is like we're stronger than we realize. You know, I never had to reach to this level of strength, but when you have to, when it's your kids on the line, you
Yep.
dig deep and you get it done. And so I just want the listeners to know that you're probably stronger than you realize. But the only time that strength, really becomes evident is when you go through a real struggle, possibly a tragedy, and so the advice I would give is understand that the investments you're making in yourself now, today, are creating the strength that you're going to need in the future. So if we truly believe that there will come a day when life is going to throw something my way that requires strength that I don't even realize I have, don't wait until that day to try to build the strength to navigate it. Start now. And a big part of that, from my story is that, you know, I am a person of faith. And so I believe that things happen, in life that shape us, they build our character, and there are no accidents, there are no coincidences. And I leaned on my faith greatly because I believe there is something bigger than just me. I've been shown more than once that, when I get wrapped up in myself, that makes for a very small package. And so I have seen the importance of getting out of myself and realizing that, you know what, the greatest blessing in life is not taking care of me, but it's serving others. And as I have done that, it's become more and more evident that I can't really serve others unless I'm taking good care of myself. And so, what does that look like? It might be spiritual, it might be physical. I try my best to get into the gym more days than I don't. And so, these are all what we would consider mundane things. But the best advice I can give is take great care of yourself now as preparation for the day when you need that strength to get you through the struggle.
I think that's a great place to end the show, actually, Chris. That was really fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today on Stare Down the Bowl. It's really a very good discussion, and I really appreciate you joining.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Stare Down the Ball. If today's conversation sparked new ideas, share it with a colleague and keep the momentum going. The future belongs to leaders who act, so subscribe and join us again next week.